Hello and welcome to another KCM Spirits video. Don't know where I was going with that. I guess there. Today I want to talk about the tasting that's coming up in just a few days. It is on Monday, November 11th, and today is the 7th. So it's about 4 days away. About meaning exactly. I've already done one video talking about that tasting, and I noticed that I got one like and one dislike on that video, and I just want to say whoever disliked that video, fine, be that way. I don't like you either. But I wanted to elaborate a little more on this tasting because I talked very generically about peated Scotch and doing a peated Scotch whiskey tasting and what that implicated in terms of how you go about doing that tasting. I didn't talk in detail about the single malts themselves and what there was to expect. I'm not going to do a video for every single malt that's in the tasting, partially because that I don't see a need to, and I don't see the necessary or the benefit necessarily. What I do want to do is I want to talk about at least the one that I found the most interesting when I went through and picked out and tried these single malts, and that would be this one. This is the Kilchoman Port Cask Matured 2018 edition. As I mentioned in my last video, the reason it's the 2018, they call it release, is because it's the second time they've done this. It's 50% alcohol by volume. It's 10,000 bottles in the batch, non-chill filtered, natural color. All these Kilchomans that I introduced in the last video and that I've talked about were non-chill filtered, natural color. There is an age statement, or something akin to an age statement, a vintage, if you will. And, you know, that's kind of the stuff that you get out of this. This is obviously matured in port casks. Typically what you'll see when you look at port matured or not sherry as much, but, you know, some of the other Chardonnay, Madeira, fortified wines or red wines or white wines or whatever, what you typically see out of Scotch distillers is they will not normally bottle exclusively in that type of barrel. They will finish, and finishing is always kind of a tough thing to understand because finishing could mean a number of things. It could be sitting there for 3 months, for a year. You don't really know. In this case, this was filled in 2014 and bottled in 2018, and it's comprised of 30 ruby port casks, which means, and they call it a vatting, which only means that they blended all these port casks together into one batch and then distributed it. So any of the characteristics you got from these different casks all kind of melded together. But what that means is you essentially have a 4-year-old whiskey, so relatively young, but it's aged exclusively in ruby port casks, hogsheads, I believe. Yes. And that's interesting because that's not something you see a lot of when you pick up a single malt Scotch, and I would challenge you to find 3, you know, that are of this variety. You will notice when you look at the bottle, it's fairly dark. I mean, it's kind of sherry colored, but a little more reddish, as you might expect from something that was aged in port. The other thing I wanted to note when talking about this is that, you know, the port whiskeys that I've tried, port aged or finished whiskeys that I've tried, I kind of have 2 different experiences when you deal with wine-based aging. Outside of sherry, sherry has its own kind of finesse, but with other types of wine-based aging in single malts, I have 2 different experiences normally. Normally it's like, this isn't really present at all and it's not that impressive, there isn't a lot to note, or it's dominating the whiskey. What's interesting about peated single malts is that when you're dealing with them in the sweet or very, the fortified wines, very strong flavors in the casks, the peat and the sweet flavors kind of combat each other, but not in like an overtaking way. They kind of, bring each other up. So the powerful flavors kind of match. And I think that's a really interesting experience that you get. I wanted to bring this one up specifically because as I went through the tasting, this one stuck out to me. It really did capture quite a lot of interesting flavors, and was very unique. It displaced some of the peat intensity. Excuse me. It displays some of the peat intensity very well. And I thought that was noteworthy. So, right off the bat, smelling this thing, you get a combination of a lot of things. The peat's in there. There is that slight tinge of tobacco that I typically associate with Kilchoman, but it's less prevalent. You get a little more of that smokiness, kind of a Lafroig peat right up front, and it's matched with this kind of like baked cinnamon apple type of smell. It's very, very pleasant right off the nose. It's very interesting. It's very well balanced. The malt's there, but it's not too prevalent. You get some spices. Really an interesting nose. And I think the noteworthy thing is, again, when you think about it, these peated whiskeys, these heavily peated whiskeys, right when you start smelling them and kind of exploring them, you typically get a lot of peat. And this does a good job of delivering everything at a very similar level. I know you didn't see me pour this, but this is at proof, so it's 50%. The same thing in the body, the arrival into the finish. A good blend of the fruitiness, some of that sweetness and the dark grape flavors, almost a little bit of like a honey type experience. And then the peat kind of comes alongside. It is a little more characteristic of that Kilchoman style of peat, which is that tobacco-y type of really deep, dark peat. I always say tobacco because that's the flavor I get when I taste it. It is a smoke. But it's a fresh tobacco. It's a light tobacco, and it's really quite interesting. It's really warm. The maltiness is there. The balance is so well executed in this whiskey. I can't say enough good things about it. And this is at 50% again. So the challenge is, again, I think in this tasting, this whiskey will come probably third, or depending on how I do it, it might be port and then red wine, or red wine then port. But it is going to be later into the tasting. So the challenge is making sure people can appreciate what it's offering. That peat tends to become a regular focal point. Really adding some water really brings out those cooked apples. Just cinnamon, sweet, confectionery flavors. And then just a little bit of that smokiness underneath, like, you know, yeah, really interesting. Well, very well done. So, this is only the second time I've tried this whiskey, but I wouldn't say it's the most complex whiskey out there. I wouldn't say where it shines is depth of flavor, although I'm not saying it lacks. It certainly does not lack. But some of those key notes you're getting, those are really front and center here. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience. You can tell the distillate's clean, very well done. It's a young whiskey, but this goes back to the quality of what you're doing and full disclosure. Kilchoman's not hiding behind their age. They put it on every bottle. They're very forthright, and I respect that a ton. It's an expensive bottle of 4-year-old whiskey. But when you drink it, you can tell everything is really high quality. From the beginning to the end of the process, everything is just phenomenally processed. The blend of the maltiness, the spiciness, the peat, the fruit. I mean, you don't get rich, like deep port type of flavor. I mean, the port is really kind of just a subtle influencer, but the way it's influencing isn't subtle, if that makes sense. The port flavor itself is very, very subtle and very in the background. The experience and the way that the port is delivering is wonderful. I mean, this is just excellently executed. I wanted to talk about this whiskey because, as I'm doing videos more regularly, I've been trying to stay away from just doing your traditional whiskey reviews, because I know that there's a lot of whiskey reviewers out there that not only do a better job than I do, but also know more than I do, and have a pretty regimented, established way of going about doing whiskey reviews. I want to avoid being just another person in there, not just because I don't think it will be enjoyable for people to watch, but also because it feels played out. I want to avoid just going off and rattling tasting notes. I want to talk more about the experience and talk about the distillers and talk about whatever, our tastings. Because really I do this for the live tastings, not for the videos. But occasionally you run into that single malt where you sit down and you really just want to kind of think about it and observe it and enjoy it. And this is one of them. I would say, kind of one of those things is the finish kind of runs short compared to what I would like to see out of it. So that would be one attribute where you're losing some of the complexity. It's not perfect by any means. But I'm not one of those people who's like, I'm never giving out a 10. If I taste something and I can't think of anything wrong with it and I love it for what it is, I'm give it a 10. I don't care. So my scale might be a little bit different than others, but I mean, this to me hits the 8.75s, almost maybe a 9 range. It's really well balanced. It's really well done. It does lack some maturity, but that's not reflected in the quality of spirit as much as it is the complexity and depth. I think this will really show well during the tasting, and it will be a different type of experience. So the trick is trying to get it past some of those lighter peated whiskeys like the 100% Islas here, which have the lower ppm peat, but not putting it in front of something like the 2009 edition, which it's pretty intense, but lovely. Anyway, so that's this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you get a chance to try the 2018 Port Cask Kilchoman, I highly advise it. I think it's a phenomenal whiskey. I love Kilchoman. I love what they're doing. Give it a taste. If you like what you see, give us a like. If you don't, you can dislike this video, but tell me what you want me to do different. Or never watch it again, I guess. Anyway, this has been Kay from KCM, and we hope to see you at Monday's tasting. Cheers.